The wheelhouse windows are sheeted in ice, and the man white-knuckling the wheel is 41 years old, watching a wave off the port bow build taller than the boat he's standing on. Every alarm on the console is screaming at once. The deck lights are dead, and somewhere below him 5 men are holding on to whatever's bolted down. That's you, in a winter you haven't lived through yet, on a night the forecast didn't see coming until it was already sitting on top of the fleet. Rewind 22 years. Right now you're a 19-year-old kid standing on a rain-slicked dock in Kodiak, Alaska, holding a duffel bag, a folding knife from a gas station, and a scrap of paper with a boat captain's phone number on it. Your flight landed an hour ago on a runway that ends in ocean on both sides. You don't know yet that the job you're about to take has, for most of its history, killed people at a rate higher than almost any other line of work in America. You're about to find out exactly why. One gray morning at a time. Level 1, the Greenhorn. You call the number from a payphone outside the harbormaster's office. A deck boss named Halloran picks up on the second ring and tells you to be at slip 4x6 the next morning, or don't bother showing up at all. The boat is the FV North Fortune, 106 feet of scarred steel that's been chasing red king crab out of the Bering Sea since before you were born. Bristol Bay's season opens October 15th, and every boat in the harbor is racing the same clock to get gear stacked and iced before the opener. Halloran hands you orange oilskins 2 sizes too big, a pair of steel-toe boots that used to belong to somebody who isn't fishing anymore, and a clipboard of paperwork you sign without fully reading. Nobody explains any of it twice. You're issued a neoprene immersion suit, the kind every hand on deck calls a Gumby suit, and you're timed pulling it on over your clothes during the dockside safety drill the Coast Guard requires before you ever clear the breakwater. Standard is 60 seconds. You do it in 94, and Halloran just shakes his head and writes something on his clipboard. The captain, a quiet, weathered man named Voss, doesn't say 10 words to you the whole first day. He doesn't need to. The deck says everything for him. Steel pots stacked 3 high, each one roughly 7 feet across, and pushing 700 pounds empty, get slung off the boat one after another by a hydraulic launcher that never slows down for anyone's timing but its own. You watch a pot swing off the rail a foot from where a deckhand named Ruiz was standing 30 seconds earlier. Ruiz doesn't flinch. You do. 6 hours out of Dutch Harbor, the swell finds your stomach, and you spend the next 4 hours on your knees at the rail, learning what's actually inside you. Nobody laughs at you. They've all done it too. Your hands split open from the cold and the bait slime within 2 days, and you wrap them in electrical tape because there's no time to bandage them properly between sets. Ruiz tells you, flat and plain, over a cigarette, he's not technically supposed to smoke this close to the bait shed, that the deck has taken more fingers and more lives than the water itself, because at least the water waits until you fall in before it takes anything. When the boat finally ties up after the first string, Halloran slides you an advance against your share, a folded stack of cash that's more money than you've ever held at once in your life, and tells you to go buy boots that actually fit before the next opener. Level 2, the deckhand. 3 weeks in, your body has learned a rhythm your mind still fights every single morning. Haul, sort, bait, stack, launch, repeat. Sometimes for 18 hours straight with 4 hours of sleep, stacked into whatever's left of the night. Voss runs his gear along the shelf edge west of the Pribilof Islands, in water 300 feet deep and cold enough, year-round, to take the strength out of your arms in a matter of minutes if you go in without a suit. One night a following sea buries the stern completely, and you're waist-deep in freezing water for a 5 count before the scuppers finally clear it. You come up laughing, because that's the deck's unwritten rule. You laugh so nobody, including you, has to sit with how close it actually was. The money starts making sense of the misery around week 4. A good week on red king crab can run a few $1,000s, a number that means nothing to anyone back home who's never worked a boat and means everything to you. At 20 years old, standing in rubber boots on a heaving deck at 2 in the morning, with salt water running down the back of your neck, you call your mother from the galley's satellite phone, during a rare lull between strings. She asks when you're coming home. You tell her after the season closes, sometime in January, and you don't fully believe yourself either. Not with the way this life is starting to feel like the only one that fits. Your girlfriend back in Seattle stops asking exactly what a ground line is and starts just asking whether you're alive, which is honestly the more useful question. Every text you send her from a bar of signal near shore starts the same way. Still here. Level 3, the deck veteran. Quick thing before you head back out into the weather with us. If a story like this is worth 4 minutes of your time, hitting subscribe costs you nothing, and it's genuinely the only thing that tells us to keep building more of them. Now, back to the deck. Second full season, and the newer greenhorns watch you the way you once watched Ruiz on that first cigarette break. You coil 300 feet of ground line in under a minute without ever glancing down at your hands. You know the exact groan a shackle makes half a second before it lets go under strain, and that half second saves your hand one gray November morning when 700 pounds of steel drops back onto the exact spot where your fingers just were. You've stopped fearing the cold the way you used to your first season. You've started fearing complacency instead, and every deckhand who's lasted this long on the water tells you it's the more dangerous fear to lose by far. When red king crab season closes in January, the boat switches over to Bering Sea snow crab and tanner crab, fisheries that now run on a longer clock stretching into spring instead of slamming shut in a matter of days like they used to decades back. Smaller crab, smaller pots, far more of them stacked on deck, and a pace that doesn't let up just because the calendar changed. You pull 18-hour stretches back to back through January and learn what it feels like to hallucinate lightly from exhaustion and keep working through it anyway, because the nearest hospital is a Coast Guard helicopter ride away. Weather permitting, and out here the weather rarely permits anything. You start keeping a running count in your head of every deckhand you've known who quit after one season and never came back, and a separate, shorter count of the ones who didn't get the choice. Level 4, the relief mate. 24 now, and Voss starts letting you stand a wheel watch on the slow steams between grounds, tracking radar returns, depth soundings, and the running lights of every other boat working the same stretch of shelf. You study the plotter until the scatter of pot buoys stops looking random and starts looking like a map you helped draw yourself, string by string. You learn that the seafloor beneath this water sits along the Aleutian Trench, one of the most seismically active subduction zones on the planet, capable of sending up a swell out of nowhere, with no local storm to explain where it came from. You start picking up engine room basics too, because a mate who only knows the deck is only half a mate to a captain who eventually needs him below just as much as above. You take a marine radio operator course during the one slow stretch of summer the fishery actually allows you to leave the boat. One night you watch Voss walk away entirely from a productive string of pots, because ice is building up high on the rigging, adding weight in exactly the wrong place on a boat that's already loaded heavy for the run home. You've heard the stories of boats that didn't walk away from ice like that. You start tracking the sudden, funneling gusts locals call willowaws, winds that can jump from a calm 40 knots to well over 80 in the time it takes to zip a jacket. And you learn to respect them the way Voss clearly already does. You understand, for the first time in your life, that the difference between a good captain and a dead crew sometimes comes down to a decision nobody standing on deck even noticed was made in the wheelhouse. Level 5, the first captain. 28, and an aging boat owner out of Dutch Harbor offers you the wheel of his second vessel, a 92-foot crabber with a crew of 4 men. Every one of them older than you, and clearly waiting to see if you actually deserve the chair you're sitting in. Your first real decision as captain is whether to run for a promising string near the shelf edge during a building gale, or hold in the lee of a Kutan island and simply ride it out. You hold. 2 boats that didn't hold that same night limp back into port with real damage, one of them missing part of its rail to a wave that came over green across the whole deck. Word travels fast through a fleet this small, And holding earns you more respect in one night than a good haul would have earned you in an entire month of fishing. You learn the business side of the job for the first time now, too. Fuel bills that eat into a season before you've sold a single crab. Insurance premiums that finally explain exactly why this work pays what it pays. You learn to deal directly with tender boats offshore, the vessels that buy your catch by the pound right there on the grounds. So you don't burn a full day steaming back to port and losing fishing time you can never get back. Your first season of record as captain closes in the black. Barely. And you sleep 3 hours a night through most of it, and honestly don't mind it one bit. By the last opener, the 4 men who spent the season testing you are the same 4 men calling you captain, without a trace of irony in their voices. And that shift means more to you than the paycheck does. Level 6, the Quota Owner. Before 2005, Bering Sea crab fishing ran as an open derby, every boat racing every other boat to catch as much as legally possible before regulators slammed the whole season shut, sometimes after only 3 or 4 frantic days on the water. By several measures, it was the most dangerous seasonal job in the entire country, with a fatality rate historically estimated at roughly 80 times the average across all American occupations combined. In 2005, federal regulators implemented the Crab Rationalization Program, assigning qualifying boats and captains an individual fishing quota, a fixed share of the total allowable catch that's legally theirs to harvest every single season it opens. At 32, you buy your first quota share of Bristol Bay red king crab. It costs nearly everything you've saved across a decade on deck and at the wheel, plus a loan that keeps you awake more nights than any storm out there ever did. But it changes how you work completely. You're no longer racing the whole fleet in a 3-day sprint against the clock and every other boat in the harbor. You fish your quota across weeks instead of days now, picking your weather windows instead of being forced into whatever the calendar hands you, regardless of the forecast. The fishery gets measurably safer because of exactly this shift, and the national numbers back it up year after year since the change. You still lose sleep some nights. You just lose it over loan payments now, instead of swells breaking over the bow. Quota shares in this fishery have sold for tens of thousands of dollars per share over the years, and buying in means betting your entire career on a stock of crab that a warming ocean might, someday soon, decide not to cooperate with. Level 7. The Boat Owner. 36 and you buy your own vessel outright, a 108-footer you name after your son, born the same winter you signed the loan papers at the bank in Anchorage. Everything is your responsibility now, every single piece of it. Crew safety, maintenance logs, Coast Guard stability inspections, insurance that costs more than most people's houses back home in the lower 48. You hire your own greenhorns off the dock every fall and catch yourself repeating Ruiz's old line about the deck almost word for word to them. Not because you ever planned to, but because it's simply still true after everything you've seen. You lose a crewman's hand that year, not to the sea directly, but to a block and tackle that takes 2 fingers before anyone standing nearby can react to a line running out fast under load. You fly him to Anchorage yourself on the next available charter and sit with him in the hospital hallway for 6 hours, understanding for the first time, in a way you genuinely never did as a deckhand, exactly how much weight a captain actually carries and how little of that weight anyone watching from shore ever sees. Your wife meets you at the airport when you finally fly home, and she doesn't ask how the season went. She just asks if everyone came back. And for the first time in your career, you have to tell her no, not everyone did, not all the way. Level 8, the Fleet Operator. 41 now, and you own 3 boats running red king crab in the fall, and snow crab and tanner crab through the long winter into spring, keeping your crews working nearly year-round, instead of scrambling for other jobs the way you once had to during the off months. You've become what the older captains call a highliner, a boat whose numbers consistently beat the fleet average season after season. And that reputation alone lets you pull the best deckhands in Dutch Harbor before any other captain even gets the chance to make an offer. You sit on an industry safety board now, working alongside the Coast Guard and NOAA on stability requirements and survival gear standards. Because you've flown enough injured friends to Anchorage over the years to know exactly which regulations are written in somebody's actual blood. You still go out yourself some seasons, not because your boats need you on deck anymore, but because staying too far from the work for too long is its own kind of danger you're not willing to risk just yet. Your 3 vessels together pull close to 2 million pounds of crab in a good year, and you've learned to read a season the way you once read a single wave, watching quota numbers, ice reports, and market prices all at once. Because a captain who only watches the water anymore is only doing half the job these days. You've buried 2 friends over the years, both highliners in their own right, and you carry both funerals with you every time you sign off on a new hire's paperwork. And this is the winter it happens. A wave off the port bow builds taller than your boat. The windows sheet over with ice faster than the wipers can clear them. And for 11 long seconds you genuinely don't know which way is up anymore. You hold the wheel. You hold the course. Down in the galley, a 19-year-old Greenhorn who reminds you uncomfortably of yourself is gripping a table bolted to the deck, and you find yourself hoping, more than anything else that night, that this isn't the story he tells for the rest of his life about why he quit. You hold, because holding is the only thing you've ever fully controlled out here, and it's the thing that gets you and your crew back to the dock alive by morning. Level 9, the Mentor, 48. And the fishery has changed more in your career than it did in the 60 years before it. Between 2018 and 2022, the Bering Sea snow crab population collapsed from an estimated 11.7 billion crabs to roughly 1.9 billion, an 84% crash that NOAA scientists eventually traced to a marine heat wave that spiked the crab's metabolism until it effectively starved them from the inside out. For the first time in the fishery's history, the snow crab season closed entirely, and Bristol Bay red king crab shut down in back-to-back years not long after that, something that would have been unthinkable when you first stepped onto that dock in Kodiak as a kid. The snow crab fishery alone used to bring in over $200 million in its best years, and watching that number collapse alongside the crab themselves teaches you more about your own mortality than any storm ever managed to. You spend more time now training young captains than fishing yourself, walking them through weather calls, quota math, and the specific difference between a decision that only looks brave and one that actually is. You give a safety talk on the dock every October before the season opens, nearly the same speech every single year, because the greenhorns arriving fresh off the plane need to hear it exactly as plainly as you once did from someone else. You tell them the deck doesn't care how tough they think they are. You tell them the water they're about to fish sits above one of the most seismically restless stretches of seafloor on the entire planet, and that the same conditions making this the richest crab ground on Earth are the very ones that can turn on a boat in minutes with no warning at all. Most of them don't fully believe you yet. Looking back, you didn't either. Level 10, the legend. 61 now, mostly stepped back from the wheel for good, though you still ride along most opening weeks because Dutch Harbor without you out on the water feels like somewhere you no longer fully belong. A documentary crew asks you to describe 4 decades on the Bering Sea in a few sentences, and you find yourself struggling to explain the particular silence of a wheelhouse at 3 in the morning to anyone who hasn't lived inside it themselves. Your son, the one your first boat was named for, runs his own vessel now, quota shares and all, and calls you, after every closing week, the same way you once called your mother from a galley satellite phone 40 years earlier. Some evenings you sit on your porch above the harbor and think about Ruiz, gone now more than a decade, and about how many nights of your life you spent fairly certain you wouldn't see the next morning come up over the water. And somewhere on a dock in Kodiak tonight, a 19-year-old is holding a duffel bag and a scrap of paper with a captain's number scrawled on it, about to find out exactly what this deck actually costs a person. That storm from the very beginning, the one with the ice on the windows and the wave taller than the boat, happened to you 20 years ago now, back when you were still building the fleet one hard season at a time. You held that night, the way you'd learned to hold years before it mattered most. And that's really the only reason there's a fleet left to run. A son out fishing his own water tonight. And a story left worth telling at all. Somewhere out past the breakwater right now, a boat you've never set foot on is racing a closing window you helped write the rules for. And every single soul on board is betting their life that whoever's standing at that wheel knows exactly when to hold.